You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we challenge the status quo of the food industry, celebrate good food founders who are building businesses on their own terms, introduce industry disruptors, and are redefining equitability. If you're ready to build your financial confidence and join the good food revolution to change the way the food industry does business, you are in the right place. I'm the Good Food CFO and your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Kat Turner, the founder of CZero. Kat is an entrepreneur, software engineer, and scientist who is passionate about using technology to empower people and solve hard problems. CZero is a company that's providing a solution for CPG brands to distribute their products without the need to have warehouses or transportation facilities. And with their platform, brands can now have access to carbon accounting, enabling them to shift towards eco-friendly logistics and achieve carbon neutrality. Kat helped me to peel back the layers of what achieving carbon neutrality really means and the impacts it has beyond our environment. We deep dive into the world of transportation, the enormous opportunity to improve efficiency across that industry, and how Kat plans to do just that with the technology they're developing at CZero. This episode is full of fascinating information that can have a big impact on the distribution of your products. So let's get to it. Hey, Kat, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've been waiting impatiently, I have to say, for this conversation. So I'm so excited to have it. You are the founder of CZero. And I talked a little bit about the company in the intro, but I would love for you to describe it to our listeners in your own words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. CZero helps CPG companies self-distribute their product. So that means that they have the power to bring their products to their customer. And that includes making available to our customers warehouse space that they need for storage, fulfillment services like pick and pack, and also transportation. And we do this through our software.
I love that. I think it's so cool. You know, when we were preparing for this podcast, we described CZero and you as distribution disruptors. Is that a title that you like? Do you think of yourself
I like it
that
a
way?
lot.
Good.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. We're here to be the new option for CPG companies who think that having to work with a distributor is their only pathway to growth. There's more possibilities when you decide to retain power. And that mainly comes from being able to own the relationship with your end customers, which would be either, direct customers that they ordered your product through e-commerce, or your retail customers like stores.
Yeah. And you have a very unique background that I think, has led to where you are now. You have an environmental science background, and you also have a bit of experience in the CPG space. Can you tell us a little bit about both of those parts of your career or times in your career and how they led to CZero?
Yeah, absolutely. And tech, actually. So
okay. All
it's
three.
pretty diverse. Yeah. Yeah. My whole life, I've been extremely passionate about figuring out how we as humans and humanity could have less of a negative impact on the planet and just move towards like a positive direction towards that. And so in my life, I explored that in different ways. And it started with science because I felt that for me to help do that, I needed to learn about how the environment worked, like the environment's chemistry. So that's what I studied in my undergrad. I was actually a researcher in various labs at University of New Hampshire, where I studied, at Stanford University. I worked like a summer there, and I did my master's in chemical oceanography. So I had a really strong background as a scientist. And after that, I transitioned to consulting because I felt that, while academia is a great area for some people, it wasn't the kind of impact that I wanted to make. I wanted to really work in the real world and not just in the bleeding edge. And so after, working a few years in consulting, I realized then that most of my work in consulting was around just assessing impact of possible projects in like drilling or construction, things like that. And I realized that that's not how I'm going to, align myself with my life's mission, which is for humans to have a more positive impact. So, I took a pivot and I decided to go full on into tech. And I put my, cap as a scientist on the side, and I really revamped my learning on writing software. And that's how I transitioned from science into tech, just becoming a back-end software engineer. And I worked at various startups, very early stage, all the way to Series C level, until I started my own. As for CPG background, absolutely. So, at some point, COVID was such a an incredible event for us, because you were able to see the things falling apart, and it really just put things into perspective of how delicate the balance of all these systems move, not only just like humanity as a whole, but also our supply chain and how fragile it is. So it really brought my attention and actually motivated me to get my job at one of the software tech companies I worked at most recently, which was Perch, as their backend engineer. At one point, I was like, I want to know what I could do directly to reduce carbon impact. Like, let's think from the what's the final product look like? And I envisioned a grocery store where everything was like carbon neutral, sustainably sourced, very affordable. Like, I was thinking kind of like a blend of like Aldi's and like a carbon neutral store.
Okay.
So then, I thought, let me start online. And let me start with one product, tofu. Because tofu is great. It's a great source of protein. North Carolina, where I lived at the time, had soy. They grew soy. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to source my soy from North Carolina, and I'm going to have this awesome locally made tofu product, hyper local, sustainable. Let's do it. And I learned that, with my background in science and tech, launching a CPG is so hard. It is just like the hardest thing to do. And it made me really appreciate food, and, CPG founders, because, there's so much processes to start that you have to go through to start a CPG, not only just first off food safety, but also food quality, product quality, and then packaging, I wanted sustainable packaging. That was a challenge in itself. It was so expensive. When I looked at compostable packaging, it was insane. That was my foray into it. And I did for months actually make tofu, from my kitchen. I learned how to make tofu. Once I got my soy, which I sourced from a farmer in Virginia, which, by the way, was a whole thing in itself. I went to the grain farm and picked up the soy myself.
Wow.
Because there was no logistics for that, which is actually kind of funny. And I made the tofu so many iterations. I had a product. I had it. I made it. The problem was getting it to scale. A lot of CPG brands start out making food in their own kitchen, then they make it at a cloud kitchen, they rent space, and that's how they get started. But with tofu, I really wanted a specific firmness to it. And with that, I needed a press. I couldn't get it from China, within a reasonable timeline. So I felt that was the sign for me to really take a step back, be like, all right, you've tried your foray into food and CPG, you got your certifications, you even made I called it DOFU, DOFU. I had a whole identity that I made videos and content about it, just talking about, mainly about carbon neutral, this carbon neutral grocery store and carbon neutral food. But that was CZero was born to just make carbon neutral easy. And the good thing with it is that it actually helped me and introduced me to the most important people in all this, which are CPG founders, which I could go on to. I'd love to talk about that. But actually, our first business transaction in CZero was, there's this company called Tempeh by the Brook in North Carolina, and they make amazing tempeh out of great products like chickpeas. And I had built a rapport with the founder, and I mentioned at one point, hey, so I'm going to Virginia to get some soy. Do you want some? You want to buy some? And the founder was like, oh yes, I'd like some. That'd be great. And so I also got that for him. But one of the things we were talking about was shipping. And if he could say oh yeah, do you mind if we piggyback on your order and mine, split the order? And I'm like, oh, that makes sense too, because we're reducing the number of trips. And that really lit a spark and thinking like, oh my gosh, there's so much ways to make an impact without launching a CPG. I could just help make this part really easy for CPG founders, and the ones who are aligned with CZero and like want to work to it, like they don't have to be carbon neutral from day one. They could just get to that, make it accessible for them. We can make the impact that I want to make. And then instead of like one store or one product being carbon neutral, I decided that I'm going to help thousands of products do it.
That's so amazing. I love it. I love the evolution of both, you as a person in your career and how you landed where you are now. So you and I spoke a couple months ago offline, and I had some very, what I would call basic questions about carbon, how carbon credits work, and just how you can even achieve carbon neutral as a business. And so I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to hear the answers to those questions, so we're all sort of on a level playing field here. And I'm going to approach this in a way that sort of makes sense to my brain. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that you can quantify a business or a shipment's carbon impact. So can you talk about that a little bit? And then I want to talk about like the fact that you can remove carbon from the atmosphere. And then I want to talk about like how carbon credits work. Does that make sense as like as a path? Okay, cool.
Yeah. And please remind me of that path.
I will. So question number one.
Question.
Yeah. How is it possible to quantify, let's just say, a transaction's carbon impact?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes down to it, all human activity has an impact on the environment, because we're existing. And one of the ways that we quantify it is through carbon impact. And so this could be done through various ways. Some scientists, when they want a ground truth estimations, they will actually measure it. In some instances, measure emissions. But for the most part, carbon impact is estimated through what are called models, like emissions models, environmental models. And then based on the activity and the type of model you have, you're able to have a range or an estimate of your carbon impact. So in order to understand carbon impact, I'm going to go to an example that I feel like a lot of people understand, which are cows and their burping. So cows burp and fart a lot, and they release methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. It is much more potent than carbon dioxide, which means that when it's released in the atmosphere, it helps the earth retain more heat than carbon dioxide. So when you have more cows, because you're probably feeding more people, there's more burping, more farting, and there's more greenhouse gases being emitted from these cows to the atmosphere. And so when I mentioned, you could measure that, you could absolutely measure that if you wanted to from the cows. But, generally you have a model to estimate it. You could get an average number of farts, burps per day. I'm literally I'm trying to help the listeners imagine gas clouds coming out. I didn't have an example. And, then from there, you can have an estimate of like how many times it happens per day. And things like that. And then also the volume, of the gas being emitted. And then from there, you could actually have on a per cow basis, like the quantity of like methane being emitted per day. And then you could translate that to, because it's methane, it's not carbon dioxide, to an equivalent carbon impact. So that is like how it's literally done for like cows. For something like in a business world, for logistics naturally, which is the area we work in, it's with transportation, emissions from the vehicles. But, the way quantifying carbon impact works as a whole, there's actually a perspective called scope. And you can look at the level of the amount of carbon impact in different stages of some of the events. So I'm not going to go too far into detail into scope, but it basically means that you can quantify carbon impact starting from the individual event, like for instance, like the cow just burping at that moment, or you could actually go all the way back, include the carbon impact of growing the food for the cow, producing the antibiotics needed, for the cow, the facility, the carbon impact of the facility where the cow is going to sleep at night, electricities for that, all put into to make this cow just grow and exist. And that could be a complete picture of the carbon impact in that. So there's different, and that's just the cow. We haven't even talked about making the burger yet.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah.
And so, which I could go, but, past that point, then food processing, there's a carbon impact associated with that. And then finally packaging the food, the package itself, there's a carbon impact associated with that because, then you have to get the materials to create the packaging in the first place. So it very clearly becomes, when you are visualizing the supply chain, you are really describing the instances of carbon impact that happen throughout it. Because like I mentioned earlier, any activities like with humans generally does have carbon impact. And so in the case of going from cow to burger, not just raising the cow, but there's also the creation of the burger until it finally lands on your table and it's in front of you, And so, how I view carbon impact though, is I view it as if it should belong in a bill. So, you go to a restaurant, you sit down, you order your burger, it comes to the table, you enjoy it. I personally like my burger with a fresh onion and ketchup and things like that, and cheese. And then when you get your bill at the end, wouldn't it be great to, not only see how much it costs, but also the carbon impact and an option to offset it. Mm-hmm. But, we got to be thinking better than that because there's lots of ways where we could reduce our carbon impact and then just make it such that we don't have to, if we want to offset it, then we don't have to pay as big of a bill at the end.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So before we get to the carbon credit, sort of the bill, I want to talk about the fact that it is possible to remove carbon from the atmosphere. I don't think listeners of this podcast know this, but I'm a huge fan of 60 Minutes. My husband and I watch it every Sunday religiously. We're just, I don't know, old people. And they recently did an episode, gosh, I can't remember what country it was in, and I wish I did, but they were actually showing the different ways here in the US and in other countries where they are, sort of sequestering carbon and they're turning it into basically like a stone, just to use layman's terms, and they're putting it in the ground or sealing it up, somehow.
Yes.
And it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, it really is. And there's a whole line of an industry created to do this. And it's great that you bring it up because in climate, there's a climate space right now. There's a lot of innovations out right now. And there's just some really interesting projects. So carbon removal is one of the ways where you can essentially create a product out of that to be able to then offer the carbon that you've removed as a carbon credit. So this basically is taking carbon removal and making it into a consumable product for businesses or people. Some people want to offset their emissions too. And so there's different projects for carbon removal. But what a lot of listeners don't realize is that the Earth actually has its own ways of removing carbon from the atmosphere as well. The problem though is that our activities are so great that we've really surpassed, a lot of its ability and capacity to absorb carbon. The biggest carbon sink on the planet is actually the ocean, which a lot of people don't know, but it's really great because when we're looking at core records from the ocean, we could actually measure the amount of dissolved total carbon dioxide in the ocean water over, eons of Earth's history within the droplets of the trapped ocean water in the cores. But it is. And actually that's something I look deeply into in my master's is just understanding how the ocean, mainly estuaries, trap carbon. But there's a lot of carbon trapping projects that not only have that awesome project that you talked about, just literally sucking the air and making it to a brick. Yeah. But also there's projects that are around restoring natural ecosystems so that they can more efficiently trap carbon. And so there's just so many exciting ways that people are exploring trapping carbon. But also there's lots of exciting projects that are aiming to just avoid or completely reduce its emission in the first place. Part of it that's CZero, but also there are some biotech innovations. So for one, I actually just spoke to a founder of a startup that what they're doing is they're developing it's like a vaccine, but it's not, because it doesn't actually, vaccinate against viruses, but it's supposed to be administered to cows to help them reduce their burping and farting. So it's in the works, it's not out yet. I know we're going back to the cow farts, I'm just like fixated on the cow farts. But it's, that's just one way that we could avoid emissions. And so there's lots of different things that you could do. There's carbon capture, there's like avoidance of the emissions in general, but it's a really exciting space. So
yeah. And I have to just kind of note that not utilizing factory farming and raising your animals in a more natural and sustainable regenerative way that can reduce carbon as well. There's a lot less farting and burping when a cow eats what it's supposed to eat instead of what it's not supposed to eat, right? But I digress. Okay, so there's carbon is measured, the carbon impact of an activity, all activities, human and animal, which is fascinating, and non-human, right? So like industrial, machine, they can all be quantified, measured, and modeled so that we're able to say, okay, what is the impact of this type of activity? Then now we know that you can actually remove carbon from the atmosphere in a variety of ways, both naturally by the environment. However, we're outpacing the environment's natural ability to do that. And where the carbon credit comes in, and this is my very basic understanding based on our previous conversation, is that, well, there's multiple ways, but essentially when we quantify the carbon impact, we can put an amount, a dollar amount to that impact such that that amount of money can be paid, and in some cases given to an organization who can use that money to facilitate their operations to sequester the carbon. Is that right?
Yes, somewhat very close. So essentially how it works is that foundationally, and this doesn't really work with the US government because we don't have a cap or limit to the total amount of greenhouse gases allowed within a jurisdiction. But the other way to think of it is that there are projects in the United States whose entire purpose is to capture carbon or avoid the emissions. And so that is a way, once they actually work, so they're actually capturing carbon or they're avoiding emissions, they translate that into a carbon credit. So it's for instance, we have avoided this much emissions. This is how much carbon credits we generated, and that's what we could offer for sale. And on the other side is we have set up this process that has removed carbon from the atmosphere. Therefore, this is the amount of credits we generate, and then this is how much we're offering it for sale. And so, for instance, a lot of the credits that CZero has bought, and we bought it through NC Green Power, which I highly recommend, a great nonprofit organization, has been through renovating the factories to help them reduce their emissions. So that's how a lot of these carbon credits have been generated and CZero has purchased. Sorry,
I have a question. So the way that I'm hearing you say it is sort of like they've already done the work to remove the carbon and now they're selling it.
Exactly. Yes. So it's not like, it's very non-linear essentially. We've been having a carbon impact for a very long time, but how these projects works is that they come into existence and through their work and carbon removal, they generate these credits, and then it's up to the businesses to purchase them. So, and they're offered as a product,
And the business would purchase it because why? What is the benefit? If the company, I just want to really understand if the organization or the company has already done it, has already removed the carbon. What does the act of selling that credit do for the business? And then what does the act of purchasing that credit do for the purchaser?
Yes, it's all about balance. I kind of explored so in a government body that actually is setting limits to carbon emissions, the business has a direct incentive to do it because, a lot of times the business is going to exceed a cap set by the government. Like government says, you're supposed to, emit no more than X amount. And then now if the business wants to exceed past X amount, they go and purchase carbon credits. But because we don't really have that, the other incentive is just business values and alignment. So there are businesses that are striving to be carbon neutral in their supply chain. And so they not only track everything and try to minimize it and, minimize their carbon impact, but whatever they cannot avoid, which a lot of times, you can't really avoid most of it, they purchase the offsets so that then they have that zero balance, that carbon debt. And so let me go into carbon debt. So, I mentioned earlier that, all human activity has an impact on the environment, every single activity. So you could take two stances. You could be like, we're not going to do anything, like whatever. Or you could be like, okay, I see my impact. I'm going to make a decision to reduce this as much as possible. And if anything, let's see if I could take steps to reduce my impact as much as I can. And then whatever I can avoid, I will purchase these credits to essentially offset or like just net zero it. And so that's why I was kind of, hinting at the concept of carbon debt, because the reality is that, these projects have already created carbon credits and they're, waiting to be purchased. And these businesses are presently, having a carbon impact. So they've already had a history of emitting it. So really, when you look at it, it's more on like the incentive is if you're going to really make a stance in fighting against climate change, it comes down to how much you're willing to commit to it, from today, because a lot of times these companies, they want to do it, but they're saying they're going to do it by, 2030, net zero by 2030, 2050. That's not fast enough for what we need as a species in order to just change our course towards climate collapse. And I'd say, so to go back to the answer to the question, what's the financial incentive? I think the big one is just humanity, surviving. I think that's like one. And then another one is that, if we're going to, if you're going to say as a business, you're making a commitment to sustainability, then why not use something that has been clearly defined and make actionable steps towards it? So that's what we're essentially making accessible to businesses, because the reality is it's okay if you've had a history of emissions, right? Like we understand that the rest of the world has, but the difference is, are you going to take action today to be able to work towards reducing it as much as possible and then offsetting whatever you can avoid?
Yeah. I think my question was more so like, if it's already been done, what is the incentive? What is the reason to pay the debt? Like, because the way I was initially understanding it was that when you pay that carbon, when you purchase the carbon credit, in my mind, it was going toward removal of
like one
carbon.
after the other.
Right.
Yeah, the reality is that these projects need to be funded. So you're taking your money, you're paying this project, they're removing carbon, right? And someone else is going to, they're going to make that to a credit, and someone else is going to purchase it. So it's really to keep the factory running. That's how it really works. It's
and that's what I was trying to get at. Like, because I think I know from some conversations that some people think that this is silly, and they're like, oh, carbon credit, so you can just pay a fee, and then it's like you can pretend that your carbon impact is gone. And there are people who think that. And so I was trying to drive toward, if we're paying this credit, what is it? What is the money doing? Right.
Yeah.
And so, and we can use CZero as an example, right? Because you guys are working with an organization in North Carolina, you said, right? So you, if we make it specific to your company, when you purchase the credits, right, you'll use those credits and then you'll purchase more. And that money that you are giving to the organization is funding the future removal of carbon.
That money is funding those, or the projects that are removing the carbon, which, just keeps it going.
Your money is going to something meaningful. It's not going nowhere. So you launched CZero in, was it
last year, 2022.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about, you mentioned sort of the ways that you are helping CPG founders to take ownership of their distribution in a sense, and maintain that relationship with their end consumer. How are you striving, because I know you're striving toward carbon neutral as an organization. Can you talk a little bit about where you are now and what you're implementing to get there?
Yes, absolutely. So to be very clear, first off, how CZero fundamentally works, we have the actions, we quantify carbon impact for actions, and there are credits that have been purchased that will, hopefully match that amount. And that's how we offset. But however, how we differentiate things is that we quantify it and then let the businesses decide if they want to purchase, or the transport providers, if they want to purchase the credits to offset. So what we've done so far is we're really trying to, really working for kind of like end to end. So we've purchased actually credits from NC Green Power already. So we're sitting on the bank, and on the other side, we're building out the fundamental functional aspects of the platform, moving the stuff, as I call it, and doing it well, being responsive to customers, executing it extremely, well, correctly. And then that's how then we will then branch into quantifying carbon impact and then making purchase of carbon credits available in our platform. Okay. So, I started this company last year and it was just me and a dream. And then over the months, I made decisions close to it, quitting my job, going all in, moving to Los Angeles to set up the first micro fulfillment site in Santa Ana, actually, in a cloud kitchen, 4th Street Market. Shout out to them. They're really great. And just like really building out the product and understanding what does great fulfillment look like? How can fulfillment be a growth enabler for businesses? And so the reality is that, there are so many products out there to do carbon accounting in the supply chain, in logistics. For some logistic providers, they bake in carbon credits, for instance, with ShopPay, with Shopify, when you make a purchase and the label is generated, they estimate the carbon impact from the shipping, and then it's offset already. They already included in the price with ShopPay. If you go through ShopPay. Yeah. So with us, we're still in the stage, we're in the early stage of let's get fulfillment right. We have the credits, and then we'll move into quantifying it, because fundamentally how we work is we're all about using space efficiently. And so we're trying to minimize our impact from the beginning. Yeah. Because if we're just doing things willy-nilly and then just estimate that, and then you have the bill, I call it, the carbon debt, you're not really making change, you're just quantifying. So we really want to be sure that we're building things in a way that minimizes it as much as possible. And, we're getting there. We have a lot of improvements to make, to be honest. And the fact of the matter is that that's how it is when you're starting a business. But, I think, starting from the principle of we got to serve our customers, you got to do it right, and then make efficiency improvements along the way and be really aggressive, ruthless about cutting out waste is how we're, building CZero. So. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what it looks like to get fulfillment right. What does that mean to you, and what does that look like for CZero?
Yeah, as I call it delivering joy. So, basically, when you deliver joy, you're not just getting the product to the person receiving it. You are being mindful about how the product gets to the recipient and the people who work to make it happen. And a combination of that is how you lead to delivering joy. Delivering joy, includes transparency in the process, where the facilities are, who's working in it, easy communication. All of our customers could talk to our fulfillment, members of the team. But also just complete transparency on, if it's arrived. If not, what's the issue? And, working diligently to resolve it if there are some. And yes, we've made some mistakes, but, we always work hard to resolve it and be very quickly to respond to resolve it. And, just focus on delivering joy. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
I was introduced to you through a colleague who has a client who was exploring your fulfillment services. Some people call it 3PL services, right? And what I found really interesting, and when I was reviewing your pricing, I was like, is this all of the information? Is this all of the details? Usually it's more complicated than this. Usually there's, other elements. And the client just kept saying, no, this is everything. I'll go back to her. I'll go back to Kat, but I think that this is all the information. Your pricing was very transparent as well and very like cut and dry. Is that
Mhm.
something that was intentional? And did you set out to price differently than others in the industry when you started?
Yes, it's absolutely intentional. As a company, we value clarity above all else. And clarity allows people to understand, what your motivations are and also how to do business. And so we came up, I came up with pricing in a way to work for micro fulfillment, to work with small businesses so that they can essentially have a cap on the cost for them, for this amount of cost monthly, you get this, you get this, you get this. And that's like, no deviations outside of that.
Yeah.
We don't have like surprise fees. And in fact, I feel like I over communicate sometimes, about that. And I feel like it's so necessary, especially if you're going to be a growth enablement business, because then people could start imagining how they could use you, because at the end of the day, a great product is actually a great tool. And so how are you going to know how to use this tool or your limits or capacity to be able to use this tool if the pricing is unpredictable,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that. I love what you just said about being a growth. I think you said it worded it a little differently, but a growth enabling company. After hearing you say that, I think that is true. There is a range. And if you utilize CZero services within, let's say 100 units, it's this price. You know what I mean? And if it's, 101 to whatever the next range is, it's this price. And it's very, very clear. And it was surprising and delightful when I was sort of analyzing the numbers for this client. Let's talk about the structure of the company a little bit. So one of the things you said earlier was that you utilize, and I don't know if you said it earlier on the podcast or if it's from our previous conversation, but that you utilize underutilized or unutilized space in existing facilities.
Yes, exactly.
Can you
Absolutely.
talk about like where those facilities are and how do you make that work? And are you doing fulfillment from those facilities as well? Or is it sort of a different type of service?
Yeah. So the next critical part of CZero that I'm actively building now is our fulfillment network. And that's where this underused space comes from. So how I started the company was one small location in Santa Ana where we don't even rent out a whole space. It's more on we just use space as is available in that facility, which has been great for us, to grow mindfully as a business, but also to minimize our footprint as much as possible. Santa Ana is really the epitome of a CZero micro fulfillment site. We just use space really efficiently. We have you have people who work on staff that pack and ship orders, and but really what that facility is actually a test bed for our app. We are fundamentally a software company. A lot of people come to us and say you're a 3PL, and it's sure, but we're actually a software and technology enablement company, because we have built not only the dashboard where CPG companies could see orders being processed, their invoicing, which of course with the classic CZero breakdown, that's what it has, but also software for warehouse operators in order to view and fulfill orders and manage inventory as well. And software, so an app, both actually for the warehouse operators and for transport. So drivers, mainly in our fulfillment network, we have solo operator drivers. So these are drivers who have their own business as a driver. So they pick up orders, manage orders, and they're looking for work all the time. Use our app as well. So the idea is we want to make it so simple for these drivers. If they're, doing a job along the way, they could, open the app and see if there's something that they could pick up, because there's a really important fact, and this is really back to, where is this unused space? Over 60% of miles on the road are actually empty miles. That means these trucks are shipping empty. They're empty, or there's just a single pallet or something like that in it. I've actually spoken to some brokers, carriers, that they told me that one of them booked a truck once that left from northern Miami and went all the way to Los Angeles shipping one pallet, a 53-foot truck. It's one pallet.
Wow.
And that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. And so
Yeah.
we're really aiming to come and eliminate that completely. And that happens through software. Because fundamentally, when you join the fulfillment network as a logistics provider, we're ruthlessly trying to fill up empty space. Like, that's what we do. And then businesses that do logistics or do fulfillment love that, because now they don't have to think about finding customers, managing accounts, because they work through CZero directly. And then CZero is managing data information for all of our customers. And we're really that data fabric to tie it all together and create that cohesive experience for the operators, but also for our customers, CPG customers. So,
Fascinating.
mhm.
I mean, I now have a better understanding of why shipping is so expensive. I mean, if you're shipping 65% of the time, nothing, and that costs you money as a shipping operation. So this is fascinating. Okay, so the CPG founder has a dashboard and the facility folks have their dashboard and tools and access to the app, as do these drivers who may be going across country, and they can identify items that they can pick up along the way and sort of deliver maybe to the same destination or along the way, however that works.
Yes.
Is
So for the driver specifically, that's what we're working towards.
Okay.
But right now, the drivers who are using the app are mainly shipping in the major metro areas. So like Los Angeles, Miami. So they're sticking to certain areas because
Okay.
this is still a pretty new app.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. We'll get to cross country. So,
yeah.
for
And
sure.
that's good to know. So for example, we've got, so the 3PL style service, that fulfillment, is that shipping across the country?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just the like sort of pick up and drop off of the larger pallets of product that are more so in the metropolitan areas at this point.
Right. And we do support cross-country shipping, but it's not in the way that I'm describing, where we're trying to find that unused space.
Yeah.
Because we're on the way to get there.
Yeah.
So, but mainly it's being used by drivers local to the metro areas. So,
I mean, that's really exciting too, and because, and oftentimes, like, I'm going to use an example, like, would you go from Oklahoma to Dallas? Or is that sort of a little too far for CZero right now and you're working toward that?
So we do have carrier partners that are able to do that. But they're, we're at the point though that the drivers that we have that use our software do not do that, but our carrier partners do.
Yeah. Is there cost savings to the founder, the CPG, business, for being able for one of those drivers to be able to utilize the app and to pick up and deliver?
Yeah, naturally, when the truck is filled up, then if they make a stop along the way, that means that the total cost of the trip decreases versus if you're going to just book one truck for yourself. Yeah. So it's because it's along the way. You're piggybacking, as I was hinting earlier in the talk, on a delivery.
Interesting. These are sort of general questions about rates. I don't want you to like quote anything, but I'm just kind of curious. When a founder is like, hey, I've got a shipment or like, that needs to be picked up and delivered, do they submit that on the CZero on the platform? Yep. Yeah. And then how quickly do they find out if they've, like, how does that shipment get coordinated? Like, does it know how to route it?
Yeah, that's the critical part of CZero, is that because we are building the data vertical, like we have the app that's used by the drivers, the app that's used by the warehouses, and that, the platform that's used by the CPG companies. Yeah. When they're placing a transport request, that is automatically pushed to the drivers in a network, and they're the ones in the area are able to see that, and they're able to put in a price. And so then, the CPG founder has an option to agree to the price or something like that. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, actually agree to the price. It's not like we're like charging automatically, like, oh, it's this. So
this is it. Here you go. Yeah. And so, I love that element too.
Yeah. So basically, it's very much that's why I emphasize, we're really building a fulfillment network, because we want to work with these solo operators who, first off, are already running around like in town, like dropping off items, but also, they dictate the true market price of things. The reality is, when there are more layers of complexity, things cost more. And one of the things that we're doing really well, especially with drivers, is that for specifically drivers only, we pay same or next day to them. And because of that, they don't have to worry about net terms. That actually helps them manage their cash flow better. And then they don't have to inflate transport prices with us too.
That's so interesting.
Because, in the industry, a lot of CPG founders are looking for net terms. And, I understand that, because everyone's on net terms. So, you're not getting paid yet either,
Yeah.
But the reality is that actually inflates prices, because then that forces the businesses to think about their cash flow. And then so they have to upfront more money to manage being able to handle net terms. And then that, creates problems. So what CZero is doing radically different than the logistics industry today too, is that we are building, and this is still in the works, and a way to essentially package financial products separate from the logistics itself. So basically how it goes is that if you're a CPG and, like, let's say you book transport, right? So we do weekly invoicing, and you have 14 days to pay it.
Okay.
But if you need more time to pay it, what you do is today, you're able to pay through Afterpay. And so you then have 90 days to pay it. But note, this is a separate financial product. So you are opting into it. You know what I mean? And so that's the difference in that, because, and we're building onto that too. Like, we're going to work beyond Afterpay. We're talking with like financial providers in the financial industry, so that we could structure loans so that businesses are able to pay their invoices through that, through more competitive rates. By doing that, we're avoiding rate inflation because of net terms, which has been a massive headache in the logistics industry.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting. I mean, this conversation is providing transparency into how the transportation industry works, right? Like, it's something that I talk about a lot here on the podcast with our guests, is that the way to improve our situation, right? The way to improve our industry, the way to, revolutionize the way that we're doing, starts with transparency. And we talk about it a lot, with transparency with the retailers that we partner with, and transparency with the distributors that we work with. And this is another element where we're really talking about transparency around how that part of the industry works. The fact that there are independent drivers who own their own business and who are, coordinating pickups and having to have net 30 terms for their deliveries is something I never knew. And I would venture to guess that the majority of listeners to this podcast didn't know that either.
Yeah.
And
I've spoken to the drivers myself too. So
yeah. And so when you're working with a large, and I can't think of the name of like a shipping company, but when you're trying to coordinate with someone to ship a pallet, essentially they are then coordinating that, and then they've got to go find drivers in a truck in some instances, or they put it out. How does that work right now? Is it sort of like that?
Yeah, it's absolutely sort of like that. The difference is that, for them, they might even work through another carrier broker. It might be like multiple carriers and brokers, it's like a whole chain.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of funny. I'm not going to name this customer, but they're moving into CZero, which is great. They're already in with us, and away from a 3PL company that has been terrible for them. And of course, the final send off is that they, book transportation. I'm just like, oh, I wish I could do it with CZero, but okay. And I'm not going to name this logistics company, but it was an absolute nightmare. And the reason why is because this logistics company did not disclose any contact information with the driver. So like when we tried to find out, is a pallet along the way, all we knew was that it left the facility. They refused to provide, a direct line to like contact the driver at all, because all I want to know is like, okay, what's the ETA?
Right.
Like that's all I want. Can't provide that. Okay, you can't provide an ETA. Okay, can we at least, get the number of the driver so we could just get an idea of like, if it's going to be towards the end of the day, towards the beginning? No, it's not available. And what happened because of the lack of they just completely broke off that communication, refused to price. It actually took 2 weeks for just two pallets to get to our facility, completely out of our control, by the way.
Right.
This is actually a major logistic company. And like when I tell people, they get absolutely shocked at them, but the complete incompetency of them, and I'm not going to go into a complete rant because it's not productive, but that is what happens when you don't have software like that works well, and that's the CZero difference. We're really, going to our logistics partner saying, hey, to join our fulfillment network, you need to use our software. And like the reality is that a lot of people are going to be turned off by that. And that's the thing. We have very high standards and we expect work to be executed extremely well. We're doing the work of building a fulfillment network and also working with these operators who have their own business concerns and, challenges associated with logistics, but we're making their payout easy. Instead of them managing 20 accounts, now they just, get a big check from CZero. Like they don't have to like chase payments of like 20 accounts anymore. They just get a big check from CZero that they know they'll always get because we're the ones, and we have bundled financial products separate, and we're using lending providers separately to manage that cash flow complexity. So they don't we take out the cash flow risk for them. And so part of that, it requires ruthlessly cutting out waste and using our technology so that things are run efficiently, and most importantly, consistent communication. We like with our drivers, we know when things are going, if there's traffic, if there's going to be a little late, we know all of that. And that's how it should be. And there's no excuses beyond that because we have the technology for it. And anything else is just settling, and we don't settle here. We never settle. So
I'm just thinking about Uber, right? And it's a single car. It's usually moving people, but now it's moving food and other things as well. And you can track its course and you know exactly where it is. And it's sort of in the simplest terms, it's like you're creating that for an industry, right? To be able to track your very important, precious cargo that costs you a lot of money to make, that you are trying to get to your customer, whether it's an individual consumer or to, I know there's a lot of, like pod foods and other types of distribution models where, you still have to get your product from your facility to their distribution center for them to help facilitate. And I can see CZero potentially being that initial delivery step, right?
Yeah. I mean, CZero will fulfill to anyone, like whether it's retailers, distributor centers, to someone's doorstep. We will fulfill to everyone and provide complete transparency and clarity for that experience. But it's all built a step at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, of course. So we're really executing well in the middle mile, working with transport partners for like the last mile, and just bringing clarity throughout where we can. So
it's amazing.
We do have some really exciting updates.
Okay.
So we are, I'm actually calling from New York City. We're expanding into New York City. So we're presently, I'm super hyped. Okay. Like, first off, like I'm in the city, and like second off, like, oh my gosh, there's so many great brands and opportunities. I'm just so excited to like help people grow their business. So, our locations are Los Angeles, Arizona, and Miami, kind of like the southern hub. So New York City is a critical step in our expansion and growth because, well, first off, it's a major metropolitan area, so many people here, so many opportunities. But the other thing is I really want to build the growth pipeline. And so with every, with every step of a CPG's growth journey, there's different ways for them to get their products to their customers. And what I want to do is I'm beginning to architect the ultimate system to help a brand penetrate coast to coast, if that makes any sense.
Yes, totally.
You know what I mean? To really get into these new markets and just be everywhere. And so New York is a critical step because I am building that bridge between LA and New York. And it's not just, because I do believe in like being mindful of how that's being done, like just not going to every major grocery or something like that. It's actually getting the product direct to market. So what does that mean? So to market is a term that I've coined, and essentially means getting the product to customers who will love your product. The thing with products is that the product isn't going to work for everyone. Sometimes they're just going to love it, sometimes they're going to hate it, or sometimes they'll be like, meh. But by getting it direct to market, you're basically focusing whatever resources you have to get that to your customers so that you're maximizing their happiness and we're delivering joy. And so by really building that's our most recent development. I'm excited to share to everyone. By building out the LA, New York pipeline, we're really just targeting, to a local level, bodegas, small stores, and working with partnerships of other startups who will really be specializing in setting up micro markets not in the facilities that you wouldn't expect there to be a micro market. I just did a shout out to my partner Cohere, so that you can get your product directly to market to people who love it. So that's our development. We're really working, collaboratively. We're inherently collaboration is us building collaborative logistics. Anyone could. The great thing with our platform is when you create an account, you're actually able to invite other people who aren't working to your company to coordinate.
That's cool.
And some logistics too. Yeah. So, we're doing it different ways. So that's the most exciting aspect in New York City.
I love it.
New York. Happy to be here. Love New York. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so as things progress in New York and, throughout the country, and as, you continue to build CZero into the ultimate dream that you have for it, how can listeners, and myself included, stay up to date with what you've got going on and what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Visit our site, the letter C, the word zero.today, and then /info. That's our landing page. It, tells about us. Also, if you go to, just CZero.today, and you click about us, you'll get to our main page. And we're actually start a newsletter soon as well. So it's actually, by the time this is released, you could sign up for our newsletter by scrolling to the bottom and then filling in your email and then hitting subscribe. So
amazing. And if someone is interested in working with you or learning more about working with you, I assume they go to CZero.today, and there's probably a link there to learn more.
You know what? I'm gonna be risky. I'm gonna say just email me directly.
I love it. What's that email address?
It's a CAT ampersand. So that's the @ with the swirly, and then the word CZero.today.
Amazing.
So just talk to me. Let's chat. Approachability. That's another thing I highly value. And also for just getting updates in general, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram, and definitely follow us on Twitter. So I definitely, whatever your chosen medium is, follow us on one of those. Okay. So, and then I post occasional updates too. So,
okay, perfect. And we'll include all of the links to the website, to the social media, and your email address in the show notes. So if you didn't get a chance to write that down, don't worry. You can just tap through to the show notes, or go to thegoodfoodcfo.com, and the info will be there along with the full podcast episode.
Yeah. That email goes to me. So you will, it does go to me. So
amazing. Yeah. Well, Kat, I so appreciate your time. I feel like there's so much to talk about in terms of what you guys are working on and all of the developments and how you're changing distribution. I know I'll be excited to join the newsletter ASAP. So thank you for your time. Thank you for diving into carbon sequestering, carbon credits, all of the details for us so that we could really understand what was going on, and for sharing how you are changing and disrupting distribution, because I think it's really exciting. And I'm just really so glad to know you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been amazing.
If you'd like to hear more from Kat about the work she is doing, or if you have questions about anything we discussed today, be sure to join us on August 1st for a live Q&A session inside the Good Food CFO community. This event is exclusively for Good Food CFO Plus members. You can become a Plus member by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting thegoodfoodcfo.com/join and choosing the Good Food CFO Plus membership level. As always, I am so grateful to have spent time with you here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, Please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help more good food founders find the show. I'll be back with a brand new episode in 2 weeks.